question.
All right, so almost Christmas, and the kids are going crazy. It's great. It's so great. I'm busy, and the house is busy, but the kids are crazy, so it's good. What do you think there? Who are you today? What is this?
Ho, 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 Santa Claus.
You're like a really young Santa? You already had a belly? Oh, okay, cool. Well, Santa Claus, what are we doing today?
We're making gingerbread houses.
We're making a gingerbread house. And in fact, ours is fancy. It's a gingerbread chalet.
What is a chalet?
It's a fancy, like, ski lodge type thing.
Ooh.
Ooh, yeah. Okay.
I was hoping to make a tree house.
Oh, okay. I don't even know how that would work for gingerbread, but cool. Let's start with our classic joke. What do you got for us, young Santa?
Where does Santa stay on vacation?
On what?
On a vacation.
Vacation? Where did you learn to say that? Where does Santa stay on his vacation?
At a ho ho hotel.
Say it like you mean it.
At a ho 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 hotel.
Okay, so that is joke number one. They're only going to get better, so stay tuned. Let's talk about gingerbread houses. I told you last time that you guys were with us, hopefully you were, that we would not be going through the production of it because it's pretty straightforward. You'll see differences between structural gingerbread and edible gingerbread. Even though this is edible, structurally it's going to be a lot stiffer. Usually there's a lot less spices because it's not nearly as important. We want it to be strong and rigid so that we can actually build something with it, okay? So we've already made our dough, and plenty of times people buy their dough pre-made. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can buy the kits, but I've noticed that people have huge amounts of trouble. Oh, okay. Huge amounts of trouble with the kits for a couple of key reasons. They are made kind of poorly. The icing is usually pretty terrible, and they have extremely rounded edges, which makes things very difficult. I'm by no means a structural engineer, but I can tell you there are a lot of ways to make gingerbread easier. So if we take our dough, when we go to bake it, and we roll it out to the thickness we desire, honestly, thicker is better on this. It's just going to take longer to cook. If you're trying to make something very, very large, you're going to want something very, very thick. But we're going to make something, what?
Is thick the big one or the skinny one?
Thick is when it's like fat. Okay, so the thicker your walls are, the easier it will be to stand up. But of course, if we have something kind of small, there's no need for it to be super, super thick.
It could be thin.
It could be thin, but what we're really looking for is we want something that's at least 3/8 of an inch when it's baked. That way it has some kind of structural flexibility in it. We're not looking for this to support a lot of weight typically. If you did, you'd have to go into a lot more structural details. Now, you might be wondering what this book is, right, young Santa? Okay, what does it say? I can't even remember. The White House Gingerbread. So when I was in culinary school in Washington, D.C., my pastry instructors were White House pastry chefs, and so Roland Mesnier, who is one of the emeritus professors, and then of course Mark Ramstow was my main pastry instructor. They worked at the White House and they built the giant White House gingerbread models every year, and they are beautiful and amazing. And Chef Mark was actually a structural engineer, so they made sure that it was perfect. And of course, when all eyes are on you, you're going to spend more and more time on it. Typically for the home gingerbread structure, we don't need anything that exact, but we can still take some keys from what they did to make theirs so perfect. So we take our structural gingerbread, we roll it out.
Yeah, structural.
Good job, young Santa. And what you'll see is I have it on a piece of parchment like I would normally, and then I cover it with something else. It can be a silicone mat, it can be parchment, it can be a baking sheet. Yes, sir?
Can it be a candy cane sheet?
It cannot be a candy cane sheet. What we're looking for here is we want it to have weight on top because
But I thought it was Christmas.
it is Christmas. But we want weight on top of our dough so that as it bakes, it's less likely to get a rounded shape if it's being weighed down. So if I'm making whole sheets of this because I know I'm going to make something pretty big, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll bake it and I'll put 2 or 3 sheet trays on top of this pan so that it's got all that weight on it. So even as the cookie rises, it's being held in shape, and then as kind of, everything kind of rises in a muffin type shape, right? It'll push all of that back outward so you get a more flat, structurally rectangular shape in the end, right? So we put lots of weight on it. It goes in the oven. Typically for these, we want to bake them colder for longer. That way we make sure they're completely dried out. So we're talking like 325 until they're dry like a cracker, okay? We could also bake them like normal, as you would bake any cookie, and then let them stale overnight, which is usually a good way to go. That way, again, we're just trying to make sure they're fully dry. If you can hear, our other little munchkin has not taken a nap, or took a super short nap, or something, because, you know, chaos. So we're gonna keep going on this thing. Santa, why don't you give us another joke?
Where does Santa cash his checks?
Where does Santa cash his checks?
At a snowbank.
At a snowbank. That makes sense. That's actually pretty good. So when our product comes out, right, if you've opted to pre-cut your shapes, which is pretty normal, that's how they are in the kits you buy, I can tell you it's actually better to bake whole sheets of this stuff and then go in and cut it out afterwards. But then, of course, there's a lot of loss or waste that goes into it. However, you can see that even something that I cut perfectly rectangular, because I had a beautiful stencil, it still changes shape as it bakes, like everything does. So when it comes out, we want to take our serrated knife and just very gently use it like it's a saw, because it is.
Be careful.
And straighten up those edges. That way, it becomes that much easier to work with. At no point in time am I trying to like force this down in there, because I don't want to crack the whole thing. We're just using it exactly as it's meant to, like a saw, okay? So we make it nice and square. And you'll do this with all of your pieces, right? So there's a side. Here is the front of our chalet, right? It's kind of nice.
Yeah,
Our little door. No, do not touch it. I do not trust you, Santa, right? So we trim our chalet. The front is usually not nearly as important as the sides. This is obviously the largest piece next to the roof, so we want to make sure that it is safe. And because we're building a three-dimensional structure, guess what? There are 2 sides, 2 fronts, and 2 roofs. That way it can all be assembled properly. So again, we're just trimming.
Where is the roof?
You'll see. I'll pull it out in a second. Now, the roof is almost always the largest part of a gingerbread house because it has to span the entire thing, and it usually hangs a little bit over. So something that I recommend doing, and I'll show it to you in just a second, is I actually just bake that as one giant piece, and then I cut it in half after baking. That way, it's more likely that they will meet at the joint on top if I'm the one who cut it than if I'm trying to put 2 rounded pieces together. Because I'm sure if any of you have experience putting a roof on a gingerbread house, they are almost always very, very difficult because the edges are so rounded. So what we're talking about here is my entire roof. Stop. And you see I made a little line. It's probably a little hard to see here. I made a little line right down the center, and that is where I'm going to cut it. Again, using this like a saw. And this way, when I go to marry this joint, it'll be nice and straight instead of trying to put 2 rounded pieces together, right? Super clean cut, very, very nice. Now we can come through and clean this up again. And while we're waiting, do we have any more jokes, little Santa?
Yes, one more.
What is our other joke?
What is the best thing to put in a gingerbread house?
I like to put some marshmallows.
Yes, that is good, but nope.
Oh.
Your teeth.
Oh, put your teeth in the gingerbread house. Oh.
Like if you were eating it.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
Wait, speaking of eating things, what do we do with that?
So you can eat that if you want, but because this is a structural gingerbread, it's not going to taste very great. It's just going to be like a dried cracker. What do you think, young Santa? Yeah. It's not supposed to have much flavor. It's not going to impress anybody. I can pretty much guarantee that. So, let's talk about icing. It's kind of the most important part because that's how this entire thing is held together. The icing that comes in the kits, in my estimation, I've only seen it once or twice, is kind of consistently terrible. They make it about the texture of toothpaste, which is really like a very thin starting point for what we're trying to do. Is a very thin starting point for what we're trying to do. What you should do is make it until it is very stiff. The point is, if you can mix this by hand, it's probably not thick enough. You almost definitely need a machine for your icing to hold itself completely straight. It should feel like putty in your hands, right? Like this is royal icing, this is just sugar and egg whites.
Ooh,
if you opt to use water or milk, It's not the worst thing in the world, but know that egg whites will dry stiffer, so it will give more structure to your gingerbread house. Now, usually we mix this. There are ratios out there, but honestly the best way for me is I put a whole bunch of sugar in there and I just start adding like a tablespoon of egg whites at a time until it starts to make a stiff paste, and then I let it work around for a while. Then we cover it with plastic wrap and let it rest for at least half an hour, because that is going to ensure that your sugar has fully hydrated. Then we're going to see if it's actually the structure that we want, because what could happen is you've added too much liquid because you haven't done this a ton, and it becomes kind of runny. If it moves at all in the bowl, like if I pull my finger through it, if it moves at all and comes back, it's too loose. It's gonna fight you the whole way. Add more sugar, use the machine, because if you can mix this by hand, again, it's probably way too thin, okay? Now you'll see when I go to put it in the bag, I'm gonna have to kind of work at this because it's quite stiff. What do you think, Santa? You can eat some in a couple days. While I'm using pasteurized egg whites, I still don't want you just to eat a whole thing full of sugar. If you are using fresh egg whites, it's totally fine. There's enough sugar in here, it will denature those egg whites and they will be more or less safe to eat. I can't like say they're perfectly safe to eat, but goodness knows we've done it forever. And if you are using pasteurized, you are good to go already. Again, egg whites will dry firmer than if you were to use any other liquid, because as they evaporate, the proteins kind of set in there, right? You gotta go for it, bud. We've talked all day about how you're not strong enough to empty the trash or anything, but sure, you can handle the icing now. Okay, so here we go. Now, I'm not kidding. This should be very difficult to pipe, right? If you've met me, you know I'm kind of a big dumb animal. So I've got good piping hands for this. We can squeeze stuff for a very long time, but I always like to start with the side.
Tasty.
Okay.
I'll eat some more.
And you see, very, very stiff. You want to pipe on top of the edge, and then this is what we will press down into the board. That way it holds on both sides. And when you're done, it should hold itself up. If one side will hold itself up all by itself, that's usually a really good sign that when you start putting them together, they will also hold themselves up, okay? Now, I always like to start with the bottoms of things. Little Santa, can you hold this for me and not bend it at all? If you break this, we can't fix it. Okay. We gotta give young Santa a very serious job. All right, so we pipe across the top, or which is actually the bottom, we just have it pointing up. But what I'm not doing is trying to pipe on the inside. I'm piping directly on the surface that's gonna touch the ground of our cake board, right? And then we will flip it over. It's fine. If it comes off, that's also a good sign. It means that it's really good and stiff. You can almost just put it in place like a little rope. And then we press it. You want to be careful. You want to be able to press it down, but you definitely don't want to push so hard that you're going to crack your house. Because again, that's very difficult to fix. Now, you can hold these two pieces together, and you can pipe right into the joint. All right? Then you can take your finger. If you've ever had to caulk anything, it's the exact same. Just smear that in there.
Can I try?
Just a second, bud. And if we're looking at it from the inside, it probably looks like kind of a big mess, but this is how it's going to hold itself together. Okay, when we look at the inside, we've created a whole joint in here just from the sugar. It takes a lot more than you think for it to actually hold itself up very well. That's another place where I think the kits kind of do you a big disservice. They usually don't give you enough sugar.
Can I hold it?
Well, let me do this. I'm glad that you're so excited to help me. But essentially, it is just copy and paste, pun intended there, right? Here, you want to be such a big helper, Santa? Why don't you hold this together? Put your hand where mine is. Hold these two right here. Okay, like this. Oh, careful. Put this other hand back here. There you go. Okay? And then what we're going to do is pipe inside here. A little bit on top.
Now I will.
And then, like I said before, once you get the three sides, the three corners, right? Or two corners, you've got three sides up, then we can start letting our young helpers help us, because it should be pretty sound by the time we get 3 of our 4 walls up. Okay? So, young Santa. We're going to switch it up now that we're getting this to stand how we want it to. Now we can start piping on the board, and then we can build it that way. Now if you want to get fancy, start piping on the front of the joists. You can do that. And then of course this is the front because we have doors and windows. It needs to go in, the icing on the ground, and then we press it all together. And then I say, hey young Santa, you wanted to help out? Why don't you help me smooth this icing into all of these sides? So you take it and just smooth it in there, okay?
Okay. I'll put that sugar down.
Okay. And then remember, we go inside, we make a nice little kind of a smooth ridge inside there. And this is how we make sure that it will hold itself together. Then we can come through on the outside, start cleaning it up. If our sugar is stiff enough, we can even take some off. And we can just kind of gently mold it around. And then you will cover that when you start doing your final decoration, adding your candies, adding your icicles and things like that. All right, watch out, young Santa, we're coming in. All right, buddy, here's your inside joint. Can you smooth it out for me? Okay, now watch your young helpers. They're probably gonna lick their fingers all the time, which is incredibly unsanitary. Right, little Santa? Yeah, we wanna make sure everyone's practicing. Here, smooth this out, inside. But especially once we have our 4 sides up, I usually like to give it a minute or 2 just to make sure that I'm not missing something. Because if we go to put the roof on and it starts sliding one way or another, we really can't go back a step. But at this point, if one of our sides started to kind of tip over a little bit, we can easily adjust that. Here you go, Santa, I got you. It's hard to work at the angle you're working at. Yeah. But you see, then we spin it around, right? This side doesn't have the best contact, so we will go through and fix that. All right, and now for the roof, right, young Santa?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the hard part. Yeah. Okay?
Super hard.
But remember, because we cut the joint ourselves, it'll be nice and flat. We take a look at where we're going. We should be feeling pretty good about this.
And then we sanitize the top.
We don't need to sanitize it, but okay. I'm glad that you learned a new word today. Weirdo.
Just kidding. Ice the top.
Yeah, ice the top.
I got confused there.
You see how slowly I'm moving with my piping bag? 1, it's difficult to squeeze, and 2, I'm not in a rush, right? If we try to assemble this in a hurry, chances are it's not going to look very good, and the better chance is that it's not going to have good structural support. Okay, so we hold our sugar on there.
Ooh, pure sugar.
It's sugar and egg whites, bud. All right.
Hey, Dino.
Now, we take a look. We can put our flat side out. Here you go, young Santa. Can you hold this? I love how I have 2 hands and he just sticks 1 hand out. Good job, young Santa. Good job. You're also moving it. Try not to move it. You don't have to let it go. Just don't dance around while you're holding it, silly boy. Okay.
Now we ice the top.
And then we ice the top, right? So we want to push a little gently. We want to make sure that that sugar is grabbing on. And then we come through.
Oh, look at the blue.
I'm told to say that if the whole thing crumbles, you can just put a dinosaur in it. Just say that it was meant to be that way all along. Right? So now we get our roof. Gently pat that in there, make sure it's like grabbing on. We can even come through. Wow, Santa, this thing's just falling apart quick on us, isn't it, bud? And there we have the extremely basic assembly of our gingerbread chalet. At this point, I like to, again, let it hang out for a good 5-10 minutes, make sure that it's like holding itself together, right? I had my Santa dancing around with it a minute ago, but we can kind of spin it around, take a look at each of the sides.
I was just decking the holes.
We can take a look at each of the sides and we can go back and start adding more structural support around the base and the sides if we need it. We can gently kind of smooth that out. Give it a good 5 to 10 minutes to make sure that it's going to stand where you want it to. We can kind of clean up at the base here. And then you come back with the rest of this icing that's left over. You always want way more than you want. And this is how you start piping icicles. This is how you start piping little tiles in your roof. This is how you build little snowmen on the sides. Really, you can make just about anything. Obviously, we can add candies and stuff to that, gumdrops, candy canes, fully baked gingerbread men and trees and things. But that is the very basic gingerbread house. What do you think, young Santa?
Yummy. I will eat it.
You will eat it probably on Christmas Day, okay? If it starts leaning one way or the other, of course you can stand here and hold it, or you can just put a can behind it, a box of pasta, something like that, just to give it. Okay. So, unless there are any questions, I think young Santa needs to find some kind of quiet time before he loses his mind. What do you think, young Santa?
Sugar?
No sugar.
Okay, I eat sugar.
No more sugar. How about you tell everybody Merry Christmas and Happy New Year?
Merry Christmas. Oh, I better put the dinosaur in the cake. I mean, the gingerbread.
Okay, so Merry Christmas. We appreciate all your support all year. We hope 2021 is better, hopefully. And then we will see you guys soon. What do you say, Blaze?
Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.